How did you sort of pursue this line of questioning? And were you surprised that he just coughed up the fact that he indeed talked to Trump that day?
Nicole, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on. I've covered Jim Jordan for just about 3 years, and I've watched and listened to pretty much every interview he's given. And he's very media friendly and he is accessible, so there's a lot to keep track of. When I went into that interview, the main objective I wanted to reach was that the day prior, he had given an interview to Bret Baier on Fox News, where Bret Baier tried to ask him, did you speak with Donald Trump on January 6th? And Jordan sort of answered. And at one point he said yes, but then he immediately pivoted into talking about how he always talks with Donald Trump and how he's in constant touch with him, which is accurate. So I wanted to find out, again, just to confirm that he did speak with him on the 6th, and then say, was it before, during, or after the Capitol was attacked? And his answer did stand out to me, because if you speak or listen to Jim Jordan frequently, you know that he's a fan of listing accomplishments under the Trump administration, frustrations he has with the Democratic Party. He's a big kind of list speaker, and he rarely stumbles over himself. So the fact that when I asked him a question of when did you speak with Donald Trump on that day, all he was able to say was, I think after, but I'm not sure. And then he kind of went on and on after that. I thought that was a little bit revealing. It is worth saying that Jim Jordan does speak with Donald Trump still very often. He told me last week that he had spoken with him the week prior. He golfs with Donald Trump regularly. He's in close touch with Mark Meadows, who was Donald Trump's chief of staff. So there is a relationship there, and it's not unusual that they were speaking. But obviously, January 6th stands out as a day where most of us remember everything that we were doing. And Jordan, at least in my conversation with him, couldn't remember, or at least didn't want to say when exactly he spoke with him.
Well, and Taylor, obviously its resonance, its renewed resonance is that his answer to you could show up in a subpoena from the Select Committee. I want to play a little bit more of your interview, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Why do you think people showed up at the Capitol and ultimately ended up attacking it? What do you think was motivating them that day?
You'd have to ask them. What I know is the former president's not to blame. In fact, he actually said peacefully and patriotically, make your voices heard. We all heard his speech. You guys covered it. Everyone covered it. We all heard his speech. We've watched it and seen it. I don't know how many times. So we know he wasn't to blame.
I mean, Taylor, let me actually, for our viewers to refresh their memory, this is the speech that Jim Jordan seems to be referring to. Trump said this, quote, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore." I mean, what does Jim Jordan think he's saying to you?
The way that over the course of Donald Trump's presidency, the way that Jim Jordan reacted to any controversial statement that then President Trump made was by basically choosing what part of the statement he wanted to focus on and disregarding the rest. And there were so many interviews throughout the past couple of years where I've tried to ask Jordan genuinely, what did you think about this? Did this cross a line? And he's a very masterful messenger in that he will choose to focus on what he wants to, and he will disregard the rest. And what I found in my conversations with him is when I keep asking a similar question, if he doesn't answer it directly, sometimes I get some more information from him, but it's often hard to kind of crack that because he is so media friendly and does speak so frequently. What I will tell you is that he will very rarely criticize Donald Trump or place any blame on Donald Trump. And I think it's because he's realized Jordan has been able to basically become a Republican superstar under the 4 years of Trump's presidency. And he wants to stay close with him, not only if he runs again, but because Donald Trump still is very influential within the Republican Party. And it's allowing Jim Jordan to write a book that's coming out later this fall. He's traveling to Iowa in a month to speak at a fundraiser, and he raises millions of dollars each fundraising quarter. So he's kind of at the peak of his political career right now. And a lot of that is thanks to how he has handled President Trump, who we've seen go after any person, whether they were extremely loyal to him or not, for just the slightest misstep.
And Yamiche Alcindor, all that sucking up, if you excuse my bluntness here, will also likely result in a subpoena for Jim Jordan. Kinzinger and Cheney clearly on board with the Select Committee's stated plan to start issuing lots of subpoenas. Any reporting on how Republican members of Congress are expected to respond?
Well, I think that is the big question. And as we've been having this conversation, the thing that's been sticking in my brain is something that happened last week. And it's that revelation that in the middle of the 2020 election, when former President Trump, was desperate to have the will of the people overturned, he told Department of Justice officials, not only should you declare the election corrupt, one, of course it isn't, but leave it to me plus my R congressmen. So those R congressmen are, of course, Jim Jordan in many people's minds, but there are so many other congressmen that also might be facing that same question that Jim Jordan is facing. It's clear that there were a number of Republicans, including the ones who voted not to certify the election, who were trying to have former President Trump's back, trying to really lie on his behalf. And all of those people might be called in to testify. What their response will be, I think, is the big question mark here. But Democrats that I've talked to, including Democratic leaders that I've talked to, they indicate that no one is off limits, including White House officials. And of course, these Republican congressmen. I want to say one other thing, because I think this story is something that's sticking to me, is the fact that the president and Republicans are saying that these conservative supporters who broke into the Capitol, who had all this violence, that they were treated worse than Black Lives Matter activists. And I have to tell you, as someone who's covered a lot of Black Lives Matter protests, people would have been shot. People would have been killed. I've seen so much less and seen so much more force used against African-American protesters that we need to underscore the idea that there were a lot of officers who were using restraint that day. And there's a big question on that, on why that is. But here is former President Trump trying to, again, play the victim here.
It's such an important point. We should never go so far down the rabbit hole covering these people. And I likened it to, it's the sort of coup version of fantasy football, where players are make-believe players on their team, where Ashley Babbitt is the heroine in their delusions. But we should also point out, Yamiche, that a third police officer, a D.C. Metro police officer who responded to the insurrection from Trump supporters, has died by suicide today. The sort of point you're making, Yamiche, extends to the disregard and this disgraceful way they're willing to treat law enforcement officials, who in all of their sort of prior flashpoints they viewed as on their side and in their corner.
That's right. I mean, you have these officers who are really dealing with a lot of mental health struggles. I remember Harry Dunn, during his testimony, being called the N-word, saying all of these things. At the end of that, and in the middle of that testimony, he said, also to my fellow officers, don't be scared to have mental health resources. Don't be scared to use these resources. So underscoring all of this sort of retelling and recasting of January 6th as a tourist visit, and all of this stuff that Republicans want to say, is this real violence, this real hurt that is continuing, that people are having to live with. And this idea that now these insurrectionists are starting to become martyrs and are starting to become sort of patron saints of the GOP, it really underscores just how far away we are from reality when we're talking about this, because had these people been African American, a lot of them probably would have been shot, just based on my own reporting. And also a lot of these officers, they were really, I think, showing a sort of respect for these people, and really trying to defend the Capitol without killing these people. And I think that that's a question that is still something that is lingering in people's minds, and something that these officers are very hurt about when they think about the way that they were disrespected and attacked on that day.
Charlie Sykes, there's a Ron Brownstein quote that I think caught both of our attention. Let me read it. We'll talk about it on the other side. Ron Brownstein said this: no matter how hard conservative columnists and commentators try to obscure it, the evidence keeps mounting that Trump's movement, infused in racism and authoritarianism, is the dominant GOP faction, too big for almost any party skeptics to openly oppose. I think it's time to abandon any pretense that everyone other than Kinzinger and Cheney isn't now complicit in what Yamiche is describing and what Taylor revealed from Jim Jordan. And I think a pivot is required now. This isn't, and there's never been two sides to the Trump question, but this is now a pro-insurrection, pro-Ashley Babbitt, anti-law enforcement Republican Party.
No, I mean, how ironic is it that, the justification for throwing Liz Cheney out of leadership was the Republicans wanted to move on, right? They didn't want to relitigate all of these issues. And yet every single day, every single week, we find out more what Donald Trump and his supporters were doing to overturn that election. And by the way, I had the same reaction that Yamiche had. This story over the weekend of the president on the phone with the Department of Justice saying, you just declare it corrupt, I will do the rest along with my cronies in the House of Representatives. What it underlines is this was the pattern and practice of this president, that January 6th was not a single discrete event that can be seen in isolation. It was the culmination of an effort by a sitting president of the United States to use his power, all the levers of power that he understood, to overturn this election, to block this election. So, to your question, Republicans, have been hoping it's going to go away. They want to move on to something else. But they're not going to be able to do this. And in part, I'm increasingly optimistic that this January 6th committee is going to come up with new information. I mean, the aggressiveness on subpoenas is really kind of eye-opening. And keep in mind, one of the things that has been a dramatic game changer, one of the things that makes this committee so much different than the impeachment committees is the fact that we now have a new attorney general and a new Department of Justice. So if the Republicans decide that they are going to defy the subpoenas and refuse to testify, this committee then can make criminal referrals, contempt referrals to the Department of Justice. Now, I don't know what the Department of Justice is going to do, but this is a very different Department of Justice under Merrick Garland than the Department of Justice that Republicans could count on to look the other way when Bill Barr was in charge. So again, Republicans may think they don't have to choose. They may think they can continue to kind of look at their shoes, but this is not going away. And you're absolutely right. We're getting this portrait of a democracy under siege, undermined in the most corrupt possible way, including political violence. And besides Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, you're not seeing Republicans lining up. But I'm not sure that this is the winning issue that some of them apparently have convinced themselves.